Hello, welcome to the podcast Growing Older with Gusto. I am your host, Gail Zuckerman, and this is a podcast that is dedicated to the art of growing older in a positive and productive way. Today, we have on the show as our guest Vincent Tilford, who's president and CEO of the Hannan Center, a Detroit, Michigan not-for-profit dedicated to enhancing the quality of life for people getting older. Mr. Tilford has been involved with the older community for 30 plus years and supports the expansion and renovation of care in the facility in Detroit. His background includes executive roles with Habitat for Humanity Detroit, among others, and he is a champion for aging equity. He has a lot to tell us about the Hannan Center and how he's helping people grow older with gusto. So welcome to the show. And what should I call you?
You can call me Vince. That's fine.
Vince is okay. Great. Vince.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Gail.
Sure. Tell us a little bit about what you refer to as, quote, creative aging. What is that exactly?
Yeah. So I guess you could think of creative aging as this movement that basically says that, our capacity to create, our capacity to learn does not diminish over time. It actually deepens because, when you think about creative pursuits, doesn't necessarily have to rely on memory, although certainly memory helps. But when you give people sort of this robust training around the arts, when I talk about arts, it could be music, it could be language, it could be storytelling and acting. When you get a lot of robust activity around that, it helps to produce these wonderful health outcomes for older adults. And so here at Hannan, we've really embraced that concept. I started at Hannan about 10 years ago and didn't know anything about creative aging at the time, and then started exploring it some more, and was really impressed with these outcomes that were proven in a longitudinal study that was done some 20 years ago. And it really showed that older people, not only do they have sort of this deepening understanding of themselves and that they are more creative. But I think the other issue with older people is that when you bring them together, you reduce isolation, and you begin to see some wonderful health outcomes like fewer doctor's visits, fewer medications, that kind of thing.
My husband is a retired physician. He used to always joke about how the older people used to come in an hour or so early because this was their creation, to your point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Anytime we do events, and we invite, people over the age of 60, I would say half of the crowd shows up early.
So now who is Dr. Gene Cohen and how did he impact you personally?
So Dr. Gene Cohen, as I said, I didn't know much about creative aging before I started this job 10 years ago. And Dr. Gene Cohen, I would say, is probably the founder, first person who kind of coined this term, creative aging. And he did this longitudinal study where he provided robust arts training to older people, throughout a period of years. And then he began looking at what their health outcomes were like. And then when he did this, that's when he found that they were reporting that they didn't go to the doctor as often. They weren't taking as many pills as they used to. And then there's other research that shows that people who have been in the creative pursuits for many, many years, and I want to sort of caveat this, is that you can do it later in life as well. But the research shows that when people have done this for a lot of years, that they build up this cognitive reserve, right? And so it shows that people who are creative, doing creative things in music and language, that on average, if they're going to get a dementia, it's usually 4 to 5 years later than when other people would normally get it who don't have that kind of cognitive reserve. And so that's how I got started in this. And I started reading his research and everything. And then we began doing some things here at Hannan to sort of really jump in and embrace sort of creative aging. So we have, we used to call it our lifelong learning classes, but now we call it Beyond You. And so these classes, they have a progression. So you can take, beginning art, intermediate art, advanced art. We have performing arts, and we always hire professional artists to teach them, because we don't want this to feel like, craftsy or like it's a hobby. This is where, people come to our classes, and they come to it with a purpose, with intention. And I think that's also a part of creative aging as well, is it gives you a purpose.
Right. Let me just ask you this. So the Hannan Center, because I'm not that familiar with it, is basically, it's not, people don't live in, it's people coming to take courses that will promote good long life.
Yeah, that's partly right. Yeah, so I probably should have led with that, Gail. But we turned 100 years old this year.
Wow.
And turned 100 years old. And when we first started out, we started by Luella Hannan. And what she was really cared about most was that older people get to live their lives out with dignity and with purpose. That was her idea. And initially, she wanted to build sort of a senior apartment building where everybody could have all the services and resources that they needed in this building and didn't have to worry about anything, right? And so that didn't happen for a long time for a variety of reasons. And so for the first 50 years of our history or so, we basically gave people a lifetime stipend to sort of age in place in their homes. Mm-hmm. And then after 50 years, we then built a facility that housed seniors for about 20 years. But the kind of facility that we built became obsolete as sort of senior housing became more in vogue. And so other housing with other services was built around us. So then we shifted again to helping seniors find purpose in terms of aging in place, and trying to bring services to them and bringing them out to a Hannan building as well. We're located in Detroit, Michigan, and we are actually located in the, I would call it the cultural district. So there are multiple galleries and museums around us. And we had a tiny gallery when I first started. So we expanded the gallery, and we now promote older adult art. We have older adult exhibits that have older adult themes. We do an annual art competition. And then, as I mentioned before, our Beyond You classes sort of feed into that as well. So people come here for the art, for the connection, a place to learn. But then we also help people on the social work side of things. So when I kind of talk about Hannan, if you're familiar with sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, mm-hmm. we try to meet people wherever they may be on that hierarchy. So if they're really struggling with the basics like housing and shelter and that kind of thing, you become that kind of community resource navigator and help them to get housing or access to housing. We provide connection as you sort of go up the hierarchy. That's important, that feeling of belonging. And then at the very top is sort of what you call self-actualization. And that's where our creative aging classes, I really think, come into play, because people are allowed to do things and explore things. And I'm just amazed at the talent and creativity that we see among our students here.
So getting back to Dr. Cohen's book, by the way,
sure.
Sounds fabulous. Dr. Cohen's book, The Creative Age, Awakening Human Potential in the Second Part of Life, that still influence people today?
I don't know that they know Dr. Cohen especially, but I would say that I think the people that we work with, they understand what the concept is, and they really do embrace it. And we saw this in particular during the pandemic, right? When the pandemic, people weren't coming to our building, and so we had to shift to virtual. And it was amazing how resilient and adaptive our students were. As we were teaching art over virtually, and the classes grew. And then as the classes grew, you saw these different connections occurring. And so the first part of class would be people just catching up what's going on in your life right now. Really important, that connection.
Right.
And then now you have them sort of riffing off of each other, commenting on each other's work, our art classes are both instructive, but it's also an opportunity to workshop pieces that people have been working on as well. So I think they get it, they understand it, and those who participate in this in our art classes are some of our biggest supporters around that. But I still think it's kind of in its infancy, creative aging. Even though, Dr. Gene Cohen wrote this paper 20 years ago, you don't see it. It is embraced in other parts of the country, but we're here in Michigan. We're probably one of maybe 2 or 3 organizations in the entire state that have a full creative aging program.
How many people are at your center, let's say, at one particular given time?
Oh my gosh, it could vary. It can be here. Usually it's like a flow throughout the day. So I would say we probably have a couple hundred people that flow in throughout the day for various sources and various reasons, right? So they could be coming for art classes. They could be coming for case management. They could be coming for counseling. We have an adult day program for people that have a dementia diagnosis. And so we serve not only the people with the diagnosis, but those caregivers as well, and providing services to them. So it just sort of depends. I mean, we do have quite a bit going on here.
How can people apply creative aging to their lives? And at what age do you think this is important to start thinking about?
Well, and kind of as I alluded to earlier, I think the earlier we begin to sort of embrace creative aging, the better off you're going to be. You're going to build or strengthen that cognitive reserve sooner, but you can still do it later in life as well. So when they looked at people who were polyglots or, speak more than one language, right? If they've done that all their lives, you find that they have a much stronger or more of a cognitive reserve than those of us who have not done that. So when I first started reading about this, one of the things I did was, after, one of the things I'll tell people is we should never be ashamed of saying our age. We always other people who are older, right? And I used to do this quite a bit. So now I tell people I'm 64 and I'm getting bombarded with Medicare offerings right now, right? But one of the things that I started probably about 3 years ago, is I hadn't taken French since high school. I started taking French again and looking at French movies, right? And one of the things that this does is that it causes you to kind of have to switch back and forth in your head it's between languages. It makes your mind a little bit more nimble. Same thing with music, right? I was in a choir. I used to play. Sometimes I go and I play the piano, right? And again, it stretches your mind. It involves you emotionally. It's creating those new neural pathways. It connects both sides of the brain, not just sort of the left side when we think about problem solving, the logical, sort of the executive functions, but it really begins to connect both sides of the brain. So I would say get involved, even if it is music appreciation. I think that is also helpful. But if you yourself are practicing music, language, any kind of art, it does help to create those new pathways, and it helps us to build up some protection against dementia.
Okay, let's get back to the Hannan Center again. What are you doing there now, and what are some of the challenges you're facing?
Oh, yeah. So I would say, someone asked me a question when I first started this job. And the question that they asked me was, how would I know if I was successful in my job, right? And I had been on the job for probably about a year, and I had watched how even the people who came to our programs struggled with this idea of getting older, right? And it's our own preconceived notions about older.
Called the ageism, right?
Exactly, ageism. And that was my answer to them, is if we can begin to change the narrative around aging, that it is still filled with possibilities and opportunities that we can contribute to our society as we age, that I would count myself successful. And so one of the things that I want to do here at Hannan is build on some of our existing programs where we are showcasing older adults contributing, who are making a difference, whether it's in their family or even in a larger setting. One of our programs that we do, we call it 70 over 70. So if you live in a big city and you've heard of Crane's 40 under 40, where they recognize young upcoming professionals, we do it for 70 people over 70 in about 7 different categories, right? And I remember this one year, this gentleman who was our top winner, and I forget the category that he was in, but he was in a wheelchair, and he could barely feed himself. But he spent the last 15 years of his life at that time researching a legal case that ended up exonerating someone who had been put away for prison for life. I had to go and get him and roll him up on stage in his wheelchair, right? But I thought, what a great shining example of we have so much to give. And if we listen to people say, oh, just go sit in the corner, go associate with, the older people and that kind of thing, then not only are we sort of less or lessened or diminished by that, but society is diminished as well. They are deprived of the talents and skills that people have.
Well, one of the reasons I started the podcast was it became apparent to me in working and being on boards that a lot of older people get thrown under the bus. Why? Because of ageism in our country. And I feel that older people have so much wisdom to dispense that I wanted to give them a forum to speak out, talk to people about how they got to where they are. How did they get to be 92 or 100 and still be going strong? And it was really interesting because one of my recent podcast episodes with a man who was 102, it's really struck me. Yeah, he said, I still feel needed. My family still needs me. And I think that's so important. And the fact that he felt that way was wow. That was a real wow moment for me.
I love that, Gail. Are you familiar with the Blue Zones?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. All right. So, and I when I go out and I talk about Hannan, I always talk about the Blue Zones because I would say when you look at across all the Blue Zones around the world, 2 things that are sort of common among them, probably the 2 strongest predictors. One is they're part of a community, right? And that community counts on them for their wisdom, for their advice, for their oral history, whatever it might be, but it's valued, right? And so that leads to the second thing, and that is having a purpose, right? So when we have community and when we have purpose, it is, I think, it's a strong predictor of being able to age well, to be able to, what's the phrase? I'm gonna mess it up here, but the phrase is we're able to add life to years as opposed to years to life, right?
That's great. I like that. So what do you see in the future for Hannan Center?
So as I started talking about earlier, I think it's really important for us to show aging in sort of all of its facets, right? It is true that as we get older, right, we're likely to become sicker. Doesn't have to happen, right? But it could be. And that's okay. And we have to be able to embrace that. But it doesn't mean that somehow our ability to contribute diminishes. And so we try to show this through our 70 over 70 program, where we get people that are nominated, we showcase them, and people are always amazed at the sort of the people that are doing things today where most people would say, you need to go sit down and go into the corner somewhere. So that's one of the things that I really want to expand here. The other thing that I want to expand on is what we call our Emerge Art Festival. This was actually an idea from one of our trustees, but it's an idea to promote those artists over age 55 who are, I think Cohen talked about sort of the latter stages in life, right? There's these 4 stages that first part of it is where you're sort of exploring, trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And then you get to this point where I don't care anymore and you kind of feel liberated. Now you can really do the things that you really want to do. And that's where I see a lot of our I Emerge artists, because they've shifted careers. A lot of them may have just started out, right? And now they are creating art. Not only are they creating art, they're selling their art. They're having exhibits around the city. And they didn't realize they had these talents before they started going through these programs. So that's really, those are the sort of the two main things I would say. And then the other thing I would mention too, Gail, is, I see creative aging as sort of one sort of intervention in terms of how do we stave off dementia. But we also have an older adult day program for people that have a dementia diagnosis. And we try to bring art into that to, again, try to build up that cognitive reserve. I would really love to expand that program, because we're the only one in the city of Detroit that has a specialty in working with people with a dementia diagnosis, and the caregivers who are burnt out and don't know how to often, how to address the behaviors. They're trying to get people to meet them where they are versus them meeting their loved one where they are.
Right. Interesting. So we're all aware of the cutbacks going back in our country from the government, whether it's for medical research or otherwise. What is the impact of federal policies and budget cuts on the older adult population in your estimation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gail. As I told you, we were started 100 years ago. And when we started, we were the social safety net. So when you think about the social safety net, you think about Social Security. We were 10 years before Social Security. When you think about Medicare, Medicaid, we were 40 years before Medicare and Medicaid, right? And that's what we were doing with the seniors that came to our doors back in the early 20s, mid to late 20s and early 1930s. That's what we were doing. We were helping them take care of basic necessities, making certain that they got medical treatment, that they had a place to stay. And then he also gave them a lifetime stipend, right? And so when I go out and I talk about this, particularly since this summer, when we had the big, beautiful bill hit, I've really been concerned about that a lot, because a lot of the seniors, it's hard to sort of self-actualize when you're worried about, where am I going to sleep tonight? Because we have seniors that receive subsidies, live in subsidized apartment buildings, and as they've been cutting, there's real concern. Now, they haven't cut that yet. The seniors that I've spoken to are very concerned about what's going to happen here. Medicaid is another one. People want to try to make it seem like Medicaid is funding, immigrants and that kind of thing. But here in Michigan, 40% of all births here in Michigan are funded through Medicaid. 40%. A quarter of the million people here, a quarter of our population in Michigan. So that's about, I think it's about 1.5, maybe 2 million people are on Medicaid. And these aren't all older people. These are people who have disabilities, our children. They're rural areas supporting rural hospitals. So I'm really, really worried for what's going to happen in a lot of these communities. Here in Michigan, we do this, Gail, a lot. We hold up our hand, right? This is Michigan. Okay. So it's like Michigan is shaped like a mitt, right? And so when you look at all of these counties that are up here in the upper part of this mitt, those are all pretty much rural counties. And they've seen an exodus of younger people as they go to look for jobs and they move to other places. And so that just leaves older people there. And so these older people are struggling. The organizations up there are struggling to provide resources to those older people to make certain that, their basic needs are being cared for. And this is irrespective of how much they've saved in life, right? Yeah, sure, you're gonna have super wealthy people, but these are people who worked hard all their lives. But the fact is, it's still tough for them to survive in this economy, right? And I'm afraid that that's going to worsen as well. So here's what we're going to do at Hannan to sort of try to address that. The stated goal of reducing Medicaid was to reduce fraud and abuse. That was sort of the stated goal. And so, okay, let's just take that at face value. How are you going to do that? Well, they're going to require people to now prove their eligibility twice a year. There's going to be greater reporting requirements. They're creating an administrative burden. And you think about it, let's say that I'm, 80 years old, I have to go in and recertify. If you make me go in person, I got to find somebody to get me there, potentially, if I'm not driving, right? So that's another example of sort of you create a burden. And then when people can't meet that burden, not because they don't qualify, but because, their circumstances, their financial, their health, whatever the case be, they're not able to finish their application. So what we're trying to do is alleviate that administrative burden. If they want us to, we will help them with those applications. We will try to find them transportation to where they need to go to prove their eligibility. But we are here to be a resource for them, because typical resources, you used to be able to call within the federal government, there's resources there, but those have been cut too. So I think what our role is what we did at the very beginning: help people to age with dignity by helping them to access those resources as best we can.
Thank you very much. Vince, this has been very interesting, learning about what you've been doing with the Hannan Center, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Any of our listeners would like to get in touch with you to learn more, or maybe if they're in Detroit, want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, one, they can visit our website at Hannan, HANNAN.org. Okay. They can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Our Instagram is Hannan Center. It's one word. On there, I provide a lot of sort of little reels around Medicare and Medicaid. I do a thing called Medicare Medicaid Monday so that people can know what's going on out there. So that's another way. And then if you're in the Detroit area, definitely call us at 313-833-1300. That's 313-833-1300.
Great. Well, listeners, thank you for listening today. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review for us on iHeart or Apple. And Vince, it was great speaking with you and learning all about what you're up to and how you're helping people age in a positive and productive way. So thank you.
Thanks, Gail. I love what you're doing as well.
Thanks.